This is a Channel Africa podcast. You can also get Channel Africa on satellite, PAS10, DSTV Audio Bouquet 802, and OpenView Bouquet, Channel 628.
Let's take a look at this story. Africa is one of the most religious places in the world. According to the 2020 Afrobarometer survey, 95% of people identify with a religion. In May 2019, the United Nations General Assembly designated 22 August International Day commemorating victims of acts of violence based on religion or belief to raise awareness and encourage action. In his recent article reflecting on this day, leadership consultant Craig Bailie stresses the importance for citizens to familiarize themselves with what their national constitutions and regional or continental bodies say about religious freedom, as well as taking a stand against related violence. He joins us now on the line. Craig, good morning. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Aurelie. Thank you for having me.
Do you think there's an understanding from Africans about their right to practice their chosen religion?
Aurelie, based on my experience, no, I'm not convinced that there is the necessary understanding. And I think that's why it is fundamentally important that as much work be done as possible to educate Africans on their right to freedom of religion or belief. And I think the more that happens, the more of a resistance we'll see against the kind of violence that many Africans are currently experiencing, either because of their religion or because of the religious beliefs of the perpetrators.
Why are we seeing this religious terrorism or violence related to religious extremism continuing to have a place and to thrive here in Africa?
Well, I think a big part of the problem is, if I could use one word, is governance. I think as we see governance, as we see at least democracy declining, not just in Africa, but globally, alongside this, we also see governance or the quality of governance deteriorating. Many of our listeners will be aware of the several coups that have taken place across the Sahel, at least since 2021. We have military governments taking control. And essentially what we have in these areas is regimes, or rather institutions, that is the militaries, that are prepared for war, but are not necessarily capable to govern civilians. And so ironically, often where we've seen these governments taking over through military coups, their reasons as being concerns over security, in many cases, security has in fact deteriorated, often allowing terrorist elements to gain ground. And with that, we've seen an increase in religious persecution and religious violence. But I also think advances in technology, this is globally, have meant that the ill effects of bad governance are more acutely felt by people who are desperate, people who, because of poor or failed governance, are pushed to the periphery of society, become more desperate to join groups who may be sincerely fighting a religious cause, however warped their theology may be, but who are then easily able to recruit people who are desperate, again, because of poor governance.
And how important would you say it is to commemorate this day, to commemorate as well the victims of acts of violence based on religion, and what would you say is the best way to do so?
Well, I think the biggest advantage of commemorating this issue is that it helps create awareness around the problem, that there is a problem in the first place. But if we define commemoration merely as, recognizing the victims of violence based on religion or belief on one day without taking action, then unfortunately the commemoration won't do much. We also have to take action. And I think a big part of that, as I've mentioned earlier, is that those who are in the know, those who possess the expertise in countering violent religious extremism, educate others as much as possible. And I think it starts with conversations such as these via radio. And, anyone who might be listening, I encourage them to go and do further research. I've mentioned in the article that you cited earlier on at least 3 sources where people can go and educate themselves on this very important issue, this very important right of freedom of religion or belief. I also think it's important that we change the language we use. I think we need to shift our vocabulary from talking about religious fundamentalism and rather emphasize violent religious fundamentalism, because I think that really is where the concern needs to be, is when someone who might be defined as a religious fundamentalist doesn't necessarily pose a threat to society. I think it's when that person turns violent, that's when it really becomes an issue.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Craig.
Thank you.
Craig Bailie is with the Bailie Leadership Consultancy.
That podcast was courtesy of Channel Africa, the African Perspective.